Picture this for a moment. The most dominant man in European history, a commander who once ruled empires and forced kings to kneel, is now twisting in agony on his bed. Dark, grainy vomit, like coffee grounds, spills from his lips. His fingernails have turned a sickly blue. His legs are grotesquely swollen. And when doctors slice open his stomach after death, they find something so revolting that even hardened British surgeons recoil. You think you know the story. Napoleon exiled, defeated, forgotten on a remote rock in the Atlantic. But that's the polished version they tell in classrooms. The reality of how Napoleon Bonaparte died is far darker. The man who once dictated Europe's fate spent his last days begging for sugar water like a child, his brain fractured by pain, hallucinating battlefields while his body rotted alive. What you're about to hear was buried in physician notes, hushed in witness diaries. The truth was too disturbing for the public. This is a story of how Europe's greatest military mind decayed into something unrecognizable. And the cruelest part? His doctors didn't save him. They tortured him to death with treatments that would now be considered barbaric. It begins on March 17th, 1821, St. Helena Island, 2,000 miles from the nearest shore. Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who once escaped exile and reclaimed his throne without firing a shot, now cannot stand without help. He cannot even keep down a glass of water. It all started with his daily ritual, a bath, but not ordinary baths. His valet, Louis Joseph Marchand, described the emperor sinking into a copper tub filled with water, so scalding that it turned his skin lobster red. 6 hours, sometimes 8, adding boiling water again and again until his skin peeled and wrinkled. The bath was the only place where the fire tearing through his stomach went quiet. Inside, something monstrous was happening. A tumor the size of a fist had taken root in his stomach lining. Not a simple growth, but carcinoma that stretched 4 inches long, gripping his insides like a parasite. Every heartbeat fed blood into that cancer. Every breath pressed it against his organs. It was devouring him from the inside while he sat in that bathtub, trying to cook away the agony. By April, Napoleon's body was transforming into a grotesque shadow of itself. His arms, one strong enough to move cannon wheels, had shriveled into sticks of bone. You could encircle his bicep with 2 fingers. But his belly, swollen and distended, filled with liters of cancerous fluid. He looked 9 months pregnant. To balance when he stood, he had to lean backwards, his frame a skeleton carrying a balloon for a stomach. The smell inside his room was beyond sickness. Not sweat, not decay, but the cloying sweetness of rotting tissue. His tumor was necrotizing, dying inside him while still attached to living flesh. Servants burned sulfur and incense to mask it. Doctors sealed windows, convinced fresh air would worsen him. The result was a choking haze of rotting chemicals, so heavy you could almost chew it. Palm Sunday, April 15th. Napoleon called for Abbe Venali, the man who crowned himself emperor, who once held the Pope hostage, now asked for last rites. "I know I am dying," he said, not dramatically, but flatly, like stating the time. Yet even in decline, his ego blazed. He dictated his will with military precision, gifting fortunes to allies and enemies alike. Even from his deathbed, Napoleon was still fighting wars on paper. But then came the treatments. Dr. Archibald Arnott, his British physician, prescribed calomel, mercury chloride, 10 grains. They were feeding him poison while his stomach collapsed. The first dose triggered horror. Napoleon passed a massive stool, black as tar, stinking of blood. His intestines were hemorrhaging. Arnott called this progress and gave him more. By late April, Napoleon's brilliant mind began splintering. Delirium overtook him. He saw cavalry charges, invisible maps, phantom enemies. At night, he called for Josephine, dead for years. By day, he demanded water, believing he was still crossing the Egyptian desert. His body was drowning in its own fluids, but in his mind he was still commanding armies. On May 1st, Napoleon tried to walk. Emperors do not die in bed, he believed. But after 3 steps, his legs gave way. His stomach convulsed so violently that his servant Ali, who had followed him since the pyramids, caught him mid-collapse. "My army!" Napoleon gasped. "Where's my army?" For men held him down as he thrashed, desperate to review troops that no longer existed. The doctors responded with brutality. Blistering plasters, patches of crushed beetles designed to chemically burn the skin. They smeared them across his chest and legs, adding external fire to his internal torment. His jaundiced skin broke into oozing red welts. They were literally burning him alive as cancer ate him from within. And then came the fatal dose. May 3rd, 20 grains of mercury, enough to poison a healthy man, followed by a violent enema. Napoleon, who had faced cannons without flinching, screamed, not in pain, in humiliation. The Emperor of Europe, held down while strangers forced poisoned water into his body. It worked too well. His bowels emptied not just blood, but pieces of flesh, chunks of stomach lining. Napoleon's body was falling apart piece by piece, and the worst was still to come. May 4th, 1821. Napoleon's condition plunged into horror. The mercury triggered uncontrollable vomiting. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning them completely red. His vomit was no longer just blood. It contained tissue, fragments of his stomach, expelled with every heave. Even as his organs liquefied, his words tried to cling to life. France, Monfils are his country, his son, his soldiers. By now, Longwood House reeked of something indescribable. Not merely death, but decomposition while he still breathed. The cancer had perforated his stomach, a hole large enough to fit a finger. Only scar tissue stuck to his liver kept his stomach contents from spilling into his abdomen. He was technically alive, but already rotting. May 5th, 3 a.m., the death spiral began. His breathing turned erratic, Shane Stokes. Shallow gasps, then silence. His brain was failing. Witnesses leaned close to hear his last words, but they disagreed on what he said. Maudlin claimed he whispered, "France, Army, Josephine." Bertrand swore he heard, "Head of the army." Perhaps Napoleon was speaking to all of them, or perhaps his words were already lost in delirium. By dawn, his throat had swollen shut. He could no longer scream, only produce guttural, animal-like sounds. His legendary eyes stared at something beyond the room, unblinking. The scene had become a twisted parody of court life. 16 people surrounded his bed, not to receive commands, but to watch their emperor die in pieces. Arnott pressed scalding bottles against his distended stomach, sending him into silent agony. His back arched, mouth open in a voiceless scream. Mustard poultices were applied to his feet, the stench mixing with rot until even doctors gagged. His skin was a map of his suffering, yellow from jaundice, red from burns, purple from lack of oxygen. By 5:49 p.m., after 17 hours of torment, Napoleon Bonaparte finally stopped breathing. No last words, no final gesture, just silence. The autopsy the next day revealed the true horror. His stomach was almost entirely cancerous, hard as leather, the perforation exactly where doctors suspected. Dr. Anna Markey pushed a finger straight through the hole. White nodules covered his intestines, cancer spreading everywhere. Napoleon hadn't just died in agony. He had been dying for years. They cut him apart, his heart and stomach sealed in silver, his ribs secretly pocketed by doctors, locks of hair snipped, even his genitals allegedly stolen, ending up in an American collection where, decades later, they were compared to a piece of leather string, dressed in his green uniform. Bicorn had at his feet, the emperor was entombed on St. Helena. But 19 years later, when his body was returned to France, something impossible was discovered. He was perfectly preserved, not skeletal, not decayed. Recognizable features, marble white skin, uniform intact. Arsenic poisoning, secret embalming, or a final mystery fitting a life of myth. The true horror of Napoleon's and wasn't just cancer. It wasn't mercury. It wasn't medical torture. It was the annihilation of everything he represented. The man who had once redrawn Europe's map was reduced to hallucinations and screams. His iron will crumbled into helpless begging. His indomitable body liquefied from within. And yet, even in his final words, garbled, broken, or imagined, he spoke of France, of his army, of the legacy he refused to surrender. Today, visitors stand before his grand red tomb in Les Invalides, imagining glory. But inside lies a man who died vomiting pieces of his stomach, his body a battlefield he could not win. The conqueror of nations conquer at last, by cancer, by poison, by death itself. And if you think this story is disturbing, wait until you hear about England's most infamous king, whose body literally exploded inside his coffin. The parallels with Napoleon will leave you speechless.